during a recent press conference hearing, President Donald Trump did not mince his words about his feelings towards Somalia and Somali immigrants.
Somalia, which is barely a country, they have no anything. They just run around killing each other. There's no structure. Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too. We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. They came from paradise, and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell, and they complain and do nothing but, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it. Thank you very much.
Granted, President Donald Trump's words would be considered quite abrasive toward any group of people, and the story is not to demean a whole group of people. However, based on the Feed Our Future fraud case, the question then must be asked, do others eat off of Freedmen's struggle? After the Civil War between the North and the South during the Reconstruction era, the majority of black people in the United States were formerly enslaved or freed black people. These are the people who built and sustained the economic fabric of the United States of America, and their heirs have yet to be compensated for the free labor and accruing and compounding interest that has created the greatest economy in the world. The majority of black immigrants did not land into what now is called the United States of America until after the Civil Rights era in the 1960s, specifically following the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which dismantled racial quotas, leading to a surge in African and Caribbean immigrants. In particular, an influx of Somali refugees fled Somalia in the early 1990s when civil war broke out. Many landed in Minnesota.
Behind this row of unassuming storefronts on Minneapolis's East 24th Street lies a little slice of Somalia. Dozens of shops sell scarves and books, fried snacks, and sweet Somali tea. Pretty much everything you can buy in Mogadishu, but in the heart of Minnesota. Marian Abdi moved here from Somalia 17 years ago and runs one of those shops. I sell rugs and flowers, she says, and it's not just to support her family in the U.S.
Who is it that you send money to at home? Who is still in Somalia in your family?
My brothers, uncles, and aunts, she says. Each month, she sends anywhere from $300 to $500 to family and friends back home.
So this shop basically helps support not just your family, but your family, their neighbors, their friends, all from here, basically.
Yes, she says, the whole family. I have this business, and I have to help them. Marian Abdi is one of 85,000 Somali Americans in the U.S., roughly a third of whom live in Minnesota. The majority fled East Africa after Somalia's civil war in the 1990s. According to community leaders in Minneapolis-St. Paul, 80% of the Somali Americans here send money back to East Africa. Aid groups say 40% of Somalia's population relies on those dollars, known as remittances, to survive. The U.S. government is increasingly concerned some of those remittances are going to terror groups that have taken hold in Muslim-majority Somalia, particularly Al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda-linked organization behind an assault on a Kenyan university this April that killed more than 140 people, and an attack on a Kenyan mall 2 years ago that killed 67. Adam Subin is the U.S. Treasury Department's acting undersecretary for terrorism and financial intelligence.
Anytime you're talking about funds transfer mechanism, whether it's wires, whether it's the banking system, any funds transfer can be exploited by bad actors, including terrorist groups. And obviously, when you're talking about Somalia, Al-Shabaab has a presence there, and it's had a very harmful influence on the people of Somalia.
As a result, Treasury has imposed stricter controls on money transfers to Somalia, where there's a weak central bank and limited financial oversight. Money transfers to Somalia are complex. Senders, say in Minneapolis, bring cash to a money transfer window. The money is then held in an intermediary bank, wired through a clearinghouse in the Middle East, and finally winds up in East Africa. But if the money ends up in the wrong hands, the intermediary banks may be held responsible. This February, one of those institutions, Merchants Bank of California, responsible for up to 80% of U.S. to Somalia remittances, decided to get out of the business.
Right now, for regular Somalis in the Twin Cities, the number of Somali remittance that doing this business are shrinking.
Somalia is home to an estimated population of more than 18 million, which compares to about the population size of New York in the United States. 2.7 million Somalis live in the capital and largest city, Mogadishu. Somalia, officially known as the Federal Republic of Somalia, is the easternmost country in continental Africa. Its gross domestic product, GDP, is about 11 to 14 billion, which falls short of the smallest GDP in the United States, with Vermont at 45 billion. Somalia ranks about 36 out of the 54 countries in Africa in GDP and one of the world's least developed economies. As far as a monetary and banking system, fortunately, Somalia reestablished the Central Bank of Somalia in 2009 after the Civil War. Somalia relies heavily on livestock, investments, telecommunications, and remittances. Speaking of remittances, according to a U.S. Bureau of Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs report, remittances remain a critical source of income and economic stability in Somalia, accounting for an estimated $2 billion annually, approximately 25% of GDP. So what does this have to do with those who are descendants of enslaved people in the United States? Descendants of the enslaved have been tossed in with the people of color jargon, POC, and oftentimes the word black or black American is thrown around like a runaway stepchild who has no home. And not only that, people who may share the same phenotype may not classify themselves as black. Or let me clarify, they will when it is convenient to do so. As you can see in the following clip, the U.S. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar conveniently uses the term black and immigrant in response to President Donald Trump.
In his first term, he called the Somali resettlement in the state a disaster. Why do you think he's so focused on this community? And what impact does that kind of racist and dehumanizing language have?
He's always been a racist, a bigot, a xenophobic, and Islamophobic. We know that he called African nations whole in his first administration. We know that when he came down that escalator, he said he was going to stop Muslim immigration into this country. And so it is not surprising that he is going after black immigrants in this country. And it's certainly not surprising that he's choosing a black immigrant community that is also Muslim. But what I would like to say is that most of us are citizens. On our passport, it says we are nationals of this country. We love that Minnesota has welcomed us. Many of us have not been settled in Minnesota. We chose it as a home because the Minnesota people and the state is beautiful and very welcoming. And we are going to be here regardless of what the president has to say.
Now, why is this important? Because Somali people in general have not identified themselves as black historically. In a Medium op-ed article written by a user by the name of Reality Dose, a question was posed. Are Somalis black? The response? The answer, though, is quite simple. No. In another opinion piece written in 2021, it was quoted that the majority of Somalis, both at home and in the diaspora, believe that they are no longer black. Some like to simply identify as Somali. They often don't see themselves as a part of the black struggle. Others see themselves as Arab or other identities that would make them not black/African. Not only that, but there is also a distaste for black people due to a narrative that has been passed on for generations and amplified in America. Black means bad. We use Somalanimo as an excuse to exclude others. This is most visible in our interactions with the African American/black community. We perpetuate stereotypes about the community, which in turn hurts us as well.
Talk about why Somalis say, "Oh no, we're not black." As a Somali who does claim her blackness, I want to explain this with love. Because that statement comes from history, survival, and sometimes pain. First, Somalia isn't a part of the Western world. In Somalia, a deeply homogenous community, there's no reason to say you're black. Everyone looks like you. For example, like Nigeria, people identify by tribe or nation, not race. Race, as a qualifier especially, only becomes relevant to most Africans when they leave their country and step into a world that sees them through that lens. During colonization, Europeans didn't just divide our land, they divided our identities. Somalis were mistakenly told, "Ooh, you look different, you're closer to Arab, you're better." Those lies that were told by whiteness seeded the anti-blackness that still lingers today. And because Somalia was not colonized in the exact same way as other African countries, many Somalis grew up thinking that blackness was synonymous with oppression, something to escape, not embrace. But Western propaganda is global, honey. So in the same way that they show African Americans, or all Americans in general, that Africans are barbaric and starving, they show African Americans to the rest of the world as lazy thugs who are not to be trusted, violent. Many Somalis arrive here as refugees and want to rebuild their lives and think, if I distance myself from this label, maybe I'll be safe. There's still no excuse. My own mother, who struggles with anti-blackness and hates my dark skin, would always tell me, "Don't be a yo-yo, don't be a yo-yo." It's pure ignorance, but it stems from fear and lies. Here's the truth. African Americans are the moral backbone of this country. Every right, every protection, every piece of good experience that you are having in America was built through their blood, sweat, and tears. Their resistance, their strategic organizing, their sacrifice, it's the only reason why we have a foothold here today. And as much as Somalis want to say, "Oh, why do you care about black issues?" It's because I'm in gratitude, and they deserve reverence and solidarity, not distance and disdain. So if you hear a Somali say, "I'm not black," "I'm not black," "I'm not black," so embarrassing. Don't get offended. Pray for them. They're wrestling with a lie that's literally older than them. A lie that was designed to keep us divided. And remember, no matter how lost we are or how far we run, we're still all one. Excuse me, thank you.
Here in the United States, categorically this has and can lead to confusion. Fortunately, the OMB, Office of Management and Budget, is taking steps to have people better identify themselves, even if they choose to identify themselves as white, or whatever racial or ethnic category they so choose. Now with the term MENA, M-E-N-A, Middle Eastern or North African, this may better suit those of Somali descent or still select Black or African American in the self-identification category. So now, let's get into the fraud case and the POC grift. Amy Bach, now convicted and previous executive director of Feed the Future, stated, she got involved in federal food aid to open doors for communities of color who don't have easy access to such programs. Amy Bach graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth in 2003 with a degree in elementary education, eventually working as a child care instructor. She joined a daycare company called Knowledge Universe, working her way up from instructor to center director. Later working for an education trade group called Minnesota Association for the Education of Young Children, where she helped child care organizations manage accreditation. She eventually met and developed a business relationship with Tara Lohman, who started a nonprofit called Partners in Nutrition in 2015. Bach would join Lohman with the Partners in Nutrition program. Unfortunately, Lohman and Bach would have a falling out, and Bach was asked to leave in 2018. 2 years prior, Bach, Lohman, and a third partner incorporated another food aid operation called Feeding Our Future. Bach then would take the opportunity to run Feeding Our Future. Both nonprofits grew exponentially during the pandemic, so much so, in 2020, the Minnesota Department of Education started raising concerns, in particular with Feeding Our Future's fast growth. Even though there are no official records of any whistleblower regarding the Feeding Our Future program, there are records of Lohman sending complaint emails to the Minnesota Department of Education about Feeding Our Partners' practices.
Well, it has already made headlines nationwide, but there may be more criminal charges to come in Minnesota's massive food fraud scandal. Lou Raguse has been investigating and discovered that millions of dollars still haven't been accounted for.
These individuals believed that they could steal tens of millions of dollars from a federal child nutrition program.
It's what federal prosecutors call the largest pandemic fraud in the country, often called the Feeding Our Future fraud, because that nonprofit is at the center of most of the 50 indictments unveiled so far.
Their goal was to make as much money for themselves as they could, while falsely claiming to feed children.
But this list of dozens and dozens of denied federal meal program reimbursement claims obtained by Carol Levin through a data request does not center on Feeding Our Future, but on food sites sponsored by another nonprofit during the pandemic, Partners in Quality Care.
I do know for sure that our sites did have food.
This is Kara Lohman, the former executive director of Partners in Quality Care, who spoke to me in this interview in March. Lohman had the same role for her nonprofit as Amy Bach did for Feeding Our Future. Bach is now indicted. Lohman has not been directly accused of any wrongdoing. But Kara Levin reviewed hundreds of pages of court documents, and they show that Lohman's nonprofit sponsored and paid at least $57 million that ended up in the hands of some of the 50 people now federally indicted in the Feeding Our Future charges.
How would you know whether it's a real site or a shell?
So we, first of all, vet the site.
In March, Lohman said her organization went above and beyond to make sure the meal sites Partners sponsored were legit.
We're required to visit them a minimum of 3 times a year. More often than not, we're visiting them much more frequently than that, where we conduct a formal monitoring visit.
I think it's fair to say that there's no way a sponsor could have a shell organization operating underneath them unless the sponsor knows it.
I would say that we do the best we can to make sure that all of those things are happening, and we're collecting all of the documentation and vetting it to the best of our ability.
But in one indictment, prosecutors referred to one of the sites sponsored by Partners in Quality Care as a shell company, the Free-Minded Institute, which was created by one of Partners' then board members. The indictment says Partners paid the Free-Minded Institute $2.5 million in fraudulent federal child nutrition program funds. That now former board member has not been charged. But these records show the Minnesota Department of Education used that example as one key factor in shutting down the nonprofit in May. Partners continues to appeal MDE's decisions.
For a $250 million fraud.
When U.S. Attorney Andy Luger announced the initial indictments, he said the fraud totaled $250 million and that more indictments would come. Kara Levin's thorough review of the charges so far found only $142 million of that suspected $250 million has been charged out to date. Another indication that the investigation may be ongoing to find out if anyone else knew money was being stolen.
What was your reaction when these search warrants and the story came out?
My reaction was shock. I mean, I was surprised, and I mean, we've always done visits. We've always checked on our programs. We've never not seen food at a site. So I have a hard time reading what's in the media and understanding how that could be possible.
Kara Lohman is no longer with Partners in Quality Care. She declined to do a new interview for this story, and the current Partners board declined as well. As we said, Lohman has not been charged. Meanwhile, Amy Bach has denied wrongdoing, and her trial is set for September.
In December 2020, the Department of Education would deny dozens of the organization's Feeding Our Future's food site applications. Feeding Our Future responded by filing a lawsuit against the department, accusing it of illegally denying children the meals they needed by refusing to approve new food sites for the nonprofit, The lawsuit noted that its contractors were largely run by people of color, and I'm going to repeat that. The lawsuit noted that its contractors were largely run by people of color, POC once again, providing meals to children of color, COC, children of color, and accused the Department of discrimination. The lawsuit was settled with no final judicial ruling on discrimination claims, and the MDE, the Minnesota Department of Education, would process applications but not without scrutiny. This scrutiny eventually led to the large federal investigation and criminal charges. The Department of Education would eventually freeze federal money to feeding our future. So let's take a step back to see how these food aid programs are funded, in particular, feeding our future. See, it starts with the federal government. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA. The USDA funds child nutrition programs, in this case CFP and SFSP, and reimburses states per meal. Now that state agency, in this case Minnesota Department of Education, approves the sponsors, like Feeding Our Future, trains, monitors the sponsors, then processes reimbursement claims and passes on USDA funds. Then the sponsor, in this case Feeding Our Future, applies to MDE, signs agreements for 250 plus sites, collects meal accounts, submits consolidated claims to MDE, receives reimbursement, and keeps 10 to 15% as administrative fees. Then the local sites and organizations, which could be restaurants, nonprofits, daycares, and community centers, for example, report meals served to the sponsors, receive funds from the sponsors to buy food and operate sites, and are supposed to serve free meals to eligible kids, which then in turn goes to children and families. So the rabbit hole goes deeper. According to a March 19, 2025 press release, U.S. Attorney's Office from the District of Minnesota states, to accomplish their scheme, Bach and Saeed created dozens of shell companies to enroll in the program as food program sites and to receive and launder the proceeds of their fraudulent scheme. In exchange for sponsoring these sites, fraudulent participation in the program, Feeding Our Future received more than $18 million in administrative fees to which it was not entitled. In addition to the administrative fees, Feeding Our Future employees solicited and received bribes and kickbacks from individuals and companies sponsored by Feeding Our Future. Many of these kickbacks were paid in cash or disguised as, quote, consulting fees, end quote, paid to shell companies created by Feeding Our Future employees to make them appear legitimate. At this time, there is no comprehensive list of all the shell companies and or individuals as the investigation is ongoing. But some of these shell companies include a company called 5A Projects, LLC, Bushra Wholesalers, LLC, Nur Consulting, LLC, Academy for Youth Excellence, and Horseseed Management, LLC.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Rena Sargentopoulos. Amy Bach's co-defendant in the massive Feeding Our Future fraud scheme spent the entire day on the stand testifying in his own defense. Cross-examination started this afternoon and wrapped up for the day in the last hour. Lou Ragus was in the courtroom, joins us now live with the latest on this story. Lou.
Rena, the prosecution is absolutely hammering Salim Saeed on every facet of this alleged fraud during this cross-examination. The last thing said before Judge Nancy Brazel quit court for the day was the prosecutor telling Saeed, "Don't you lie to this jury."
Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson began his cross-examination of Feeding Our Future defendant Salim Saeed by asking him about a prior conviction in Indiana for forgery, fraud, and theft. Saeed said, "I was set up." "Just like you didn't commit this fraud, correct?" Thompson sarcastically responded. As part owner of Safari Restaurant in Minneapolis, Saeed and his partners received $16 million in federal child nutrition money through the sponsor Feeding Our Future. Thompson asked, "This program made you and your partners rich, correct?" "Yes," Saeed responded. In his morning testimony, Saeed and his attorney focused on showing the jury the large number of meal claims, up to 6,000 per day, 7 days a week, was plausible. Saeed testified that the meal program portions were very small and that they had 5 meals packaged together in each of these food containers. They showed the jury several photos and short videos of food packaged up, but none showing food being distributed to children. At one point, Saeed testified that Somali people don't like to be photographed. And at another point, he admitted no children ever came into Safari, but that their parents picked up the food. Saeed also claimed he delivered about 2,000 meals every day to the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. In cross-examination, Thompson pointed out Cedar Riverside had a whole slew of sites of its own, claiming to serve 1.2 million meals in addition. Trial evidence shows that Saeed also profited from meal sites across the state, including in Wilmer, all with identical meal count numbers. Saeed insisted on the witness stand, if you're making good food, people will come to you.
And so cross-examination did not quite finish this afternoon. That will resume first thing in the morning. The judge also wants them to get to closing arguments tomorrow. Between the prosecution and the two defendants, the closing arguments will take a total of about 4 hours. Then the jury will begin deliberations. Back to you.
All right, so if any of that went over your head, let's break it down like this. So let's go back to that chart. All right, so once again, the federal government gives money to the state agency. The state agency then, based on the sponsor, gives money based on reimbursements to the local sites, right? But that's not what happened. This is what happened. Let's go down to the local sites. Because see, the question is like, well, who's paying for this? How do they get the money? Ding, ding. That's what I said. I was just like, when I went through this whole thing, I was like, well, if they're making all this money, who's paying for it? Well, that'd be the federal government. So let's go back down, right? Because you have the local sites that were supposed to be reporting the meals, but guess what? There weren't any meals reported. And those videos that you saw, definitely a front. Because they may have been given some meals here and there, but it wasn't meals allegedly, weren't giving the amount of meals as they said that they were giving on the video. So going back to the chart, you have these local sites making up some stuff, then using reports, fake papers, however they did it, sending it out to the sponsor, which would be Feeding Our Future. And the Feeding Our Future would say, hey, we got these reimbursement claims. They gave it to the state agency. The state agency was like, oh, those look good. We'll go ahead and approve them. So they took the money from the federal government, gave it back down to the sponsor. Then the sponsor then gave that money to the local sites. And that's, in a nutshell, how these local sites, these shell companies, as well as the sponsor, being Feeding Our Future, was able to fund their scam. Because they didn't have any operating money in the beginning to reimburse, or quote unquote, to have reimbursed those meals, or those so-called meals, that weren't actually given to families or children. Yeah, I don't even want to go into the whole reimbursement process with the government right now, because I mean, when you think about it, you actually have to have some capital to get reimbursed, and just don't want to go there because, you know, we're going to have to provide some statistics, going to have to look into, you know, black businesses, may they be for-profit or non-profit, just to see how we're getting this money. How do we survive? Right? Because if you have people who are doing scammy stuff like this and getting money, and then not even like doing what they're supposed to say that they're doing, and scamming, you know, the system. And it's not just with, you know, what happened in this case. It's with everybody. It goes through all classes, all cultures, you know, all people. But, you know, because we focus predominantly on, you know, freedmen, Black American issues, then, you know, we're going to have to look at, like, what are the resources and where are these resources going to? Thank you for watching and listening. We're probably going to go ahead and do a part 2 of this. I want to tackle more data, local data on the Minnesota level, and maybe even wrap in SB 515, which is a local data disaggregation bill out in California. and also look into more so of the food aid program. See who those sponsors are. Are they black? Are they white? Are they Latino, Asian, etc.? Who's actually controlling the money? Mostly in Minnesota when it comes to these food aid programs. And also who's and how an organization or a group of people or a person is being selected to distribute those funds. And also see, how many black-led sponsors and how many black-led sites are there, organizations that distribute food to people out there. Because I think as we move into the future, especially with the OMB and the U.S. Census, on the federal level, state and local level, we need to see who's doing what. And going back to the question, are others taking advantage of the freedmen struggle? Because that's what this data does. It shows the inequities that have happened and are happening to the freedmen communities. So thanks for listening. Thanks for paying attention, and keep educating yourself. Please like, share, and subscribe to your #1 source for news and reparations. And we'll see you next time. Peace and reparations.